Welcome to the IntroZone, a show about the Microsoft 365 intelligent intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, here with my co-host Chris, who is also a Microsoft employee, McNulty.
Am I still?
I sure hope so, Chris.
I haven't left my house in a year and a half.
You're still my friend, badge or no badge, whatever.
Well, today we're going to hear from our HR team at the company I used to go to, Microsoft, to learn about their strategy and design of building out processes and systems to support employees around the world here at Microsoft. You'll hear from our CVP of HR, Kerry Olin, and our HR Technology General Manager, Jay Clem. And for the record, I was actually back at the office last week for a customer meeting, which was fascinating.
All right, and the HR part of that, your badge still worked, right?
Our badge still worked. Our employee health check system was already pre-registered for me, so it was kind of interesting from that perspective, and also kind of odd to be standing in front of a live audience doing a presentation for the first time in 18 months.
Well, that audience, they were lucky to get Mr. Chris and to make sure it was safe and everybody was probably aware of all protocols, but that you could actually do it. I bet a lot of it was based on a lot of the thinking and strategies that our HR team put together in terms of this real hybrid work that you've experienced. We've got two great guests, and we're going to kind of pitch strategic business type questions, technology questions. If you're in HR or not, if you are an employee of HR and you want to promote some things that you hear on this podcast, you're going to hear questions across the board of what both Kerry and Jay do, what they're thinking and listening from what employees are saying, the importance of employee well-being, and just keeping everybody happy as an employee, because retention is a huge thing.
I'm really curious to get their takes on this problem I've been thinking about. Because when we're working on Microsoft Viva, obviously employee experience becomes top of mind. And I know you and I, Mark, are both working on lots of other things beyond Viva. You know, there was a day when to get something for yourself as an employee, you would go to a payroll office or a personnel office. And the last 20 years, there's been much more focus on what services can people bring to my desktop back in what used to be Building 3. Do I have to go to a help desk to get something fixed, or can things be done remotely? Can I get to self-service? And now I don't even have a desk. You don't have a desk. Well, I mean, sitting at a desk at home, but like, how do you create culture? How do you create that feeling? Because there's very much a Microsoft way of being connected and engaged as an employee. And how do you sustain that when I'm not going to the Fred McMurray personnel office? Sorry, incredibly non-sports reference to Breakfast at Tiffany's. Yeah. I just fascinated that there was an office that's just for people.
And if I put three things into perspective, I joined the company just about 15 years ago. So there was a process at that point. I really remember one of the most important things was a piece of paper on your desk that gave you your password, that then you went in and changed, who your main contacts were, and anything else that was going to be coming your way as far as hardware or any software requirements.
Is it a problem? I haven't changed that password yet.
That's very McNulty of you. Yeah, certainly you can change it at any time, and those requirements of being passwordless are very interesting times right now. But, that process, that long ago may have adjusted and changed. There, of course, was a new employee onboarding, which we called NEO, where you'd actually go into a physical classroom and meet other new employees and engage that way with people who are new to the company. But before I ask you what your onboarding experience was like, the one thing that has been very true, and we just heard from our leadership that Chris and I both report under, is one statistic that's not really giving away anything, but it's just interesting. Within this last year and a half, within the COVID period, people who've joined our team, who we may not have yet met in person at all, which is strange as that, but we have hired and onboarded completely in a digital fashion. No pieces of paper, no rooms to go meet in. There have been, of course, ways to engage versus in a virtual world, but about 100 people within our Microsoft 365 marketing team have onboarded completely within seen this last year and a half in a very different fashion. And it really is a tribute to a lot of what you'll hear today from Kerry and Jay, that the systems are in place to be that flexible. And for those people, even though they're dying to meet people in person, aren't left to just do with what they will and feel lost at Microsoft. It's a really nice onboarding system with a lot of change in the last year and a half.
It was either in the New Yorker or in Slate. I saw a reference to someone's story who said, they started and ended a job during the pandemic. Their question was, if I was employed and I never saw a single colleague or piece of the office, did I actually work there?
What you're asking is, if a tree falls at work and nobody's there, did it make a sound?
It did make a sound if it's our campus, because when I was there last week, they've been busy building lots of new buildings and so forth. But yeah, it is important to have there wherever you are, if you follow what I mean.
I do. As an employee at Microsoft, as one example of an HR team that is pretty public around sharing our best practices and, of course, tools that we sell and make support, really nice experience for employees. But just your maybe take on, what do you see that you get from our HR team? Doesn't have to be Kerry or Jay, that you just think, gosh, that is really thoughtful in terms of how they want this experience for me to be top notch.
What I would say is, when we are hiring people, what I've observed is kind of the two sides of this. One is to make sure that my experience as an interviewer is well coupled and orchestrated. The meetings are set up, that I've got access to places for notes, that I have a CV from someone that I can review, what are the job requirements, all those sorts of things are nicely packaged for me. And on the candidate side, remembering that ideally some candidates become employees. It's the beginning of their employee experience. Treating them in a way that they're going to be seen as, valued and welcomed and appreciated, and that there's a bit of a plan for them. They've been thought about before they even had their first interview of the day, what we call the loop. The fact that the care goes in on both sides of that, I think, is a really important value. And it's definitely one I've seen us sustain, I think even advance during the pandemic, because there are fewer ways to convey that first impression. So I think we're all putting a little bit more effort into that with both our tech and our upfronts.
I know we used to pitch the inner loop, the outer loop, and what you're describing as truly the HR loop. It is that first connection point for somebody to be introduced to the team they may be on, the culture of Microsoft. And in the loop, the way that they design it, what I really like about it too is that they intentionally want people who are going to ask the technical questions, ask the strategic questions, maybe be there to share, here's what our team culture is like within Microsoft. And it is well designed. I agree with you. So before we chat with Kerry and Jay, we want to play some introductory thoughts from our Microsoft EVP and Chief HR Officer, Kathleen Hogan, about the importance of data and insights. And with this piece of audio, a special thank you to David Green and the My HR Future team, also from the Digital HR Leaders podcast, for the reuse of Kathleen's audio clips from the episode Creating a Data-Driven Culture in HR at Microsoft. So let's take a moment and hear from Kathleen Hogan.
People wanted to know that their work was valued. Right? When you're remote and you're not getting to see your manager, you still want to be seen and you still want to be valued. They wanted to make sure that we were prioritizing and really being active in helping them prioritize, just given the workload that people were facing, not just at work, but at home. And those are sort of the insights that we can gain from our listening systems to then better empower our managers to empower the employees with insights on, like, this is what really is going to matter to our employees. Data and insights are essential to everything that I'm talking about. Hybrid. What are we learning about hybrid? What's working in this current environment? How can we marry workplace analytics with people sentiment and insights that then drive what we're doing in terms of how we're setting up the new hybrid work environment, both around policies, around people, but also the physical environment. So yeah, data is absolutely key to everything we're doing. It's not just related to one dimension of the function. I would say it's needed in all areas and fuels the insights and helps us make better decisions in all aspects of the business. Well, I'm really proud to be, I guess, customer zero for Viva, but also having connected with my peers over the last 6 years, really understanding what are some of the key areas that we all want in terms of having this great employee experience that can empower our managers to empower employees, can just empower employees. And the Viva rests on top of Teams, which I think is already this incredible platform that has saved us during the pandemic. I can't tell you how many times people have said, can you imagine if we did this without Teams?
Well, Mark, thank you very much for sharing that. I thought that was really great to hear Kathleen talk about it. On the Viva team, I know in our customer discussions, there's some signals and data that we look at from our customers, and it's kind of great to see a parallel set of numbers just being looked at by our own leadership. So it just reaffirms that we're focusing on the right thing by looking at this part of the experience.
So let's turn our attention to really hear from a subject matter expert who is very close to this show in the context of he also works at Microsoft, but at a very different space, really on behalf of the ability for Chris and I to do the best work possible for ourselves at Microsoft. We want to introduce Kerry Olin, who is our Corporate Vice President of Human Resources Services here at Microsoft. Kerry, I want to welcome you to the Intro Zone.
Hi, Mark. Thanks. Great to be with you.
Can you share a little bit more with us about your role at Microsoft?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm part of our HR leadership team, and the responsibility of my group is really to provide what we call kind of at-scale services for supporting our employees and managers around the world, and that includes self-help delivered through technology, of course, but also assisted support, administrative services, and also employee and manager consultation when they need to talk to an HR person. Our team also provides a range of professional shared services, privacy, risk management, HR business controls, et cetera. Ultimately, we want to make HR work for 160,000 plus employees.
So, Kerry, I would love to get your thoughts on this. You know, I spend a good portion of my week working directly with customers. The past 2 years have really seen unprecedented change in the ways they go about their digital work lives. And whether they're in manufacturing or retail, they also have some common threads for, like, real estate looks very different. And that starts to get, a little bit closer to home with Microsoft. And we've spoken to some of the folks who are in real estate planning, but would also love to get your thoughts on kind of the human resource side of how do we manage people at Microsoft. What does that whole realm look like now, and how is that different from what it was even a couple years ago?
Well, Chris, I will start by saying that my inclination is, to stay humble on this point because, I think we're still in the midst of an experience and a transformation where, the final chapter has not been written. Nonetheless, it's I think, been stunning to reflect here on what's changed, just as you say, in the last couple of years. I start with maybe not a change per se, but the period has at least reinforced the importance of purpose and culture and their importance to connectedness and cohesiveness in an organization. I mean, in a period where, so much has been disorienting and honestly at times discouraging, just the groundedness that results from having that deep sense of purpose individually and at a company level, as well as a commitment to a shared culture is, I think, been more than we would have ever imagined. A couple of other thoughts. I got a few here, but, many companies have embraced cultural aspirations related to learning and growth, diversity, inclusion, and we've certainly done that. And, it's not just been the pandemic period, but a really important period of events and change in society. I think we're seeing more concrete steps being taken. Aspirations, if you will, related to culture are really realized to a much greater degree in lived experience. I still think that's a journey, but it's one that Microsoft and many companies are on. Employee experience, I think, even 5 years ago, a lot of companies, HR practitioners, leaders would say, that employee experience is important. Of course it is. But I think the conception of employee experience is much broader. And I think leaders are more ambitious and more convicted about its importance. Well-being and care have become central, not just about benefits programs, although those matter. It's about listening to employees deeply and with empathy, providing tools and resources to empower employees and take charge of their own well-being. I think it's also about making care central to the role of managers and empowering managers to achieve their goals in caring for their teams. And because managers share a shared purpose, a goal that, employees that work on their teams can thrive and do their best work. I'm excited now about how we're putting more data into the hands of our managers to enable them to support their teams. And, with Microsoft Viva, we're on the cusp of really accelerating transformation in how managers can provide this care for and lead their teams. One more thought maybe on hybrid, kind of an academic concept not many years ago. It's very real now, and we believe, like many, that virtually every organization is going to need to create a new flexible operating model that doesn't rely on, traditional in-office workday concepts. Employee expectations have changed. Organizations are embracing those expectations. And, in many cases, organizations, I think, are rightly viewing hybrid as a potentially differentiating experience. And I guess the last thing I'd say on this point is that, while we can say that, certain things historically might have assumed to be true and have proven not to be, even if we're not sure of the exact future state, back to my point on humility. But Satya Nadella, our CEO, did a podcast recently with Ryan Roslansky, CEO at LinkedIn, and I'm sure listeners get access to that. But Satya talked about something he called the hybrid paradox. It really resonated with me. He described the paradox as being that employees have grown to embrace and value flexibilities in ways they might not have imagined, and yet also value, and at this point, frankly, are missing in some cases, that in-person interaction and collaboration. I, for one, am experiencing the paradox in my own work. It's not fully resolved. We continue to learn and grow, and that's why I think that we're still in the middle of something very significant here. But I think with great tools like are available with Microsoft and others, that at least we've got some resources that are going to help us in many scenarios, at least to contend with the realities and the changes that are happening.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. Like, one of the statistics I use a lot with customers is derived from our own work trend index reporting. And it's something on the order of 80% of employees like flexibility and want those benefits to stay. And then 67% of employees also want to return to some level of face-to-face interaction. So there's a lot of people who want both. Speaking about what people want in the workforce, I also wanted to kind of circle back on something that you suggested before. Microsoft operates, in a world that's really shifted in the past 2 years. And when we think about in 2020, there were a lot of people who wanted to work but couldn't. And as we've seen different areas and industries start up, they're having, in some cases, issues with retaining or bringing talent back. People are using the pandemic as a choice to sit down and figure out, maybe I want to do something different, or what do they want out of it? So I know that within HR, talent acquisition and retention is top of mind. Can you talk a little bit about talent architecture?
Talent architecture is a term we've used internally for something that I think is quite a common and important challenge and opportunity in every company. It's basically, can we describe the work we do effectively at the level of a role, and how a role then is part of a discipline or a profession? But can we describe that work accurately and effectively? And then can we describe the skills, the abilities, the experiences required to be successful in performing that work? And it seems like such a basic concept, but it is fundamental in our view to a lot of what we're trying to achieve in terms of modern HR and employee experience. To the extent we're clear on what's required for success in a role, we create then the conditions for improved recruiting. We create the conditions to achieve one of our goals, which we call screening in, which is really trying to create an inclusive hiring process. So we're as clear as possible on what matters. And frankly, we don't get ourselves distracted by focusing on attributes that may be, frankly, limiting our candidate pool, but aren't as important to really what matters in a role. It also is critical to really create the conditions for accelerating career development. Because if we're transparent for our employees in terms of what skills are required for a given role, what experiences or other attributes are required, we provide guidance for them in their own development. And actually, we also provide guidance at a corporate level for where we make skilling investments, which is skilling. Ryan Roslansky was talking about skilling, a huge focus area for LinkedIn. But a great talent architecture or taxonomy actually helps guide that strategic skilling focus in ways that are difficult without it. And, honestly, once you end up with career development opportunity experience, the more a company is great at that, the more likely it is that employees will embrace that company, Microsoft or elsewhere, as a place where they can grow and develop and ultimately stay.
I think it's really important to hear how that architecture has evolved and, of course, evolves with the time. And I would even assert, with the notion of a hybrid paradox, some of those adjustments that you were just describing, where the realities of where people work from and where they come on board, have changed so that maybe the paradox is less paradoxical. And I hope that's not overstepping it too much.
I think it's fair. And also, when we think about skills, the notion that a manager needs to develop and cultivate the skills of managing a hybrid team or managing a distributed team in a hybrid world, there are concrete skills that can be gained in that. But we have to be intentional about it, and we have to be clear that part of the, if you will, the requirements or attributes of a manager role in a modern hybrid workplace does include that ability and effectiveness in managing a team like that.
I do want to drill a little bit more into hybrid because I think it's not just an employee experience that is new, but it's a little bit of a real reality right now, but also setting up customers for success that they can build in that flexibility and it really is managing across somebody's entire day. As we see and as you reflect on questions that you get from our same customers that Chris and I talk to and probably a lot more, certainly from the HR roles, as they're getting back to work and they're looking at it, or at least hearing about this new hybrid work lens of how to adjust, can you share any of those main things that we've done here at Microsoft for all 163,000 plus employees worldwide that you would say would be our key strategic adjustments because of hybrid?
Yeah, sure. Let me try to tick through a couple quickly. And the good news is we have not attempted to keep this to ourselves. In May, Satya met with over 200 CEOs around the world and discussed post-pandemic transition. And we've shared our internal playbook on how we're approaching hybrid for our own employees across people, places, processes, and we're excited. We're on a learning journey. We're curious about what others are doing. I think from my vantage point, a couple of things have been important. First, we did take steps now almost a year ago to begin to create some clarity on our vision for hybrid work, including post-pandemic. And that was a key step that we took to push ourselves to start to, have a point of view on what the future would look like. We said flexibility would be defined in three areas: work site, a home office or a Microsoft office, on work location, recognizing that work site for some will be dynamic rather than static, and then work hours. And we took some assertive positions, like saying that working from home up to 50% of the time would be standard and not requiring approval for most jobs. Second, we called employees and managers and teams to action. We urged people to engage in discussions related to working preferences with the goal of arriving at individual and team agreements and ways of working. And these discussions aren't once and then done. They're ongoing. Third, we established a principle that for many flexible work decisions, we want to empower employees and managers and frankly, limit broad rules, with the premise being that supporting individual and teamwork styles while balancing the business needs invariably isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of a problem. And it requires localized judgment, yet within some clear company frame and operating context. So those are at least three areas that we felt are important. But again, we've tried to think broadly and deeply about this across technology, people, et cetera. And I was excited to see us publish a lot of this externally.
I would love to get your thoughts on what advice you would give to listeners who are trying to emulate some of these practices. And while you were speaking, it occurred to me, I know a goodly number of the systems that we use internally to report on workforce health with polls and surveys and some of the Viva tools and so forth. How do you integrate that with a sort of intuitional, active learning, interpersonal dynamic that's important for a manager? It sounds like you have to do kind of both of those things, at least in your role.
It's a great point. I would say that any modern, and I talk to my peers and others, I think many of us are pursuing very much common direction. Our goal has to be in a virtually continuous conversation with employees on a wide range of topics. And we have to think broadly and deeply about how to enable that conversation. There are tried and true traditional tools, periodic, maybe annual sentiment surveys. They're quite common across companies. Microsoft does them, and we use them, and they're useful. But we've also moved to what we call more of a pulse survey, and it's designed to reach a significant subset of employees each quarter. Although those surveys are sent almost continuously, and we adjust and update questions based on the most relevant topics at any moment. And then we've moved now, even with our assisted support function in HR, to really use that not just as a question answering solution or a problem resolution approach, but it's also as a listening mechanism. Using text analytics and other at-scale tools to mine individual employee exchanges for sentiment trends. We can de-identify that data. It's not about making, individual privacy risks or anything like that, but it's how do we use the mechanisms not only that we would choose, but that employees would choose to use to ensure we're hearing their feedback. And we've developed quite a continuous feedback loop between our frontline HR advisors who deal with thousands and thousands of employee interactions every year, but get that feedback loop to our HR centers of expertise, who ultimately shape our policies, programs, and can take that feedback and really use it so our employees feel like we don't just hear them, but we're listening and acting on what they're saying.
You had mentioned earlier in the show with the work that our team is doing from a product perspective with Microsoft Viva, and reflecting on what you were just sharing, the two things that pop in my head that are very visible to the end user, me as the employee, in our Viva Connections instance with Microsoft Web, that pulse that you mentioned is right there in front and center, where the results are a trend over time. But it's really nice that that's not hidden data that is maybe making big decisions on the back end with your team and with the leaders. But it is also something that I can just see. How is the company feeling? And within something like Viva Insights, there is that notion of how effective are my meetings, not just all meetings at Microsoft, but when I'm either leading a meeting or participating, I can provide that feedback and then get real interactive feedback within the tool to tell me how effective are these meetings? What can I do to change? And, getting back to what you were saying, what we've heard from Kathleen, that having the data and insights is really crucial, but then what do you do with it? How do you get it? And I think ultimately then the visibility, as you're describing, and as I know just from some of my own employee experiences here at Microsoft, it's really, truly helpful.
Absolutely. And I'm not only excited about where Viva is today, but I'm even more excited and optimistic about the capabilities that it will enable for managers, employees over time. And one thing I'd add to what you say, which I think creates even more power in the platform, is it's in what I know, it's not just me, but others I call in the flow of work. That team's environment is increasingly the office, in quotes, that so many people are coming to work in every day. And to make those insights real and surfaced in the flow of work where they already are, to make access to tools, help, et cetera, available and accessible in that flow of work, I think is super powerful, and something that I know many at Microsoft are excited about. And I have confidence that our customers are and will be equally so.
On behalf of Microsoft employees, it's great to hear from you, from the sense of what is our HR team doing strategically to help support what we do day to day, whatever our role is, but also tactically to thank you for being on the IntraZone and, informing both ourselves and our audience into the practices and how we share out what it is that HR can do with the tools and some of the strategies behind it. So thank you for your time.
Well, hey, thanks for inviting me. And like so many at Microsoft, as curious as others might be about what we're doing, we are at least as curious about what others are doing. We make every effort to connect with our peers who are, in many cases, also customers and vice versa, and certainly look forward to learning from others. And hopefully we can be part of that dialogue and contribute to it as well. So thank you.
Okay, IntraZone listeners, now that you've got a sense of human resources at Microsoft from a strategic perspective from CVP Kerry and that focus around hybrid work and listening and growing and moving through, let us turn to just get a little bit more technical. We know our audience loves to know about from strategy to implementing with technology. So let us take a moment and hear from Jay Clem to get a sense of what he and his team in the past and now are doing to create a great employee experience through the technology that we engage with. We are now going to transition the conversation, not to just talk about technology, but to get to somebody who's a little bit closer to implementing and making sure that these are wonderful experiences based on the technology that is supporting. So we're going to talk with Jay Clem, who is a Microsoft partner and general manager who spent a number of years in HR and now is moving on. We want to welcome Jay to the IntraZone.
Well, thank you, Mark. Great to be here.
Could you share with us a little bit about your role at Microsoft, both that kind of mix of what you did and what you're now doing?
Yeah, certainly. And I'm one of these lucky people who just are blessed to have a job that you love to do every single day, to get up and be excited about it. And, over the last 5 years, I've really been able to focus my time on the experiences around human resources. And it started off with spending time inside the HR team. You mentioned Kerry Olin, the HR services leader, and then our people officer, Kathleen Hogan, just amazing people. And I actually worked for both of them and helped us think through the experiences for our employees and then have the chance to transition and combine the teams and join the HR IT group. And so really on the other side of the table, one big happy family, but really the IT person supporting the HR group where I had come from. And so that's been really 3 of the last 5 years, maybe 4. And then what ended up happening was the account teams across Microsoft, so our own sales force, would reach out to me and say, hey, I've noticed all the changes with the technology we use here. Would you mind talking to my customer? And I said, absolutely, love to talk to customers. And it was once a month and became kind of once a week. And then it became a daily thing. And I finally said, hey, love to do it. How about we find a way now that I think we're down the path on our journey to help other customers, just like we've done here at Microsoft. And so now I sit inside the industry solutions team and have the chance to sit with customers and help them do the same things we've done here at Microsoft.
That's super helpful. I mean, I joined Microsoft 7 years ago, and before I was here, all the job titles just all sort of blended together from the outside. And I was general manager and CTO over at Dell. So yeah, it's great to get that explanation. We were just talking to Kerry about the importance of open dialogue and active listening. And there was an IT showcase article where you expressed a really similar goal as to how you approach solutioning here at Microsoft, trying to get, if I'm quoting it from memory, the balance between self-service tools and, when needed, getting human help. So I would love to kind of have you tease that out a little bit for the audience about how you strike that balance between doing something that's automated, immediate, along with something that is human and personal.
Great question, Chris. And just like anything, when I'm talking, to a representative at a bank or maybe my internet service provider, there's times when I'm happy to talk to more of an automated activity, an automated bot on the other end just to help me get through it faster. But there's also times when I just don't. And so I think when you talk about human resources and when you want to automate the transactional kind of stuff to get that person back to what they love to do, which is probably not, figuring out how to get an employment verification form off to their bank because they're applying for a loan. But there's a time when maybe your child is sick and you want to talk to a registered nurse, which is one of our amazing benefits at Microsoft to have a chance to go do that. And so, carving out when to automate those transactional things and then when to really enable the human interaction is really important. And I think that's some of the stuff that Kerry and I and others in HR had thought through. How do we optimize our experiences? And so that we can find those transactional things and then give time back to the HR team to focus in on the people side of HR.
I know throughout the years with SharePoint, a lot of the focus has been how can we enable self-service, and then we would encourage our customers, turn on the self-service capabilities, make sure you have it validated in how you implement it, the governance is there, any templates that help make that programmatic. But the reality of just getting out of people's way and letting them get to the information they need or to get to the tools like SharePoint to use. And and probably Chris too, has benefited a lot from, if I'm having some very specific HR type information that I'm looking for or need to make a request for, or just to find who is our HR rep because I have a question. You all have made that very easy, and it's really nice to see that strategic arc to making that balance so that there are things that are proactive and some things are, do it 24/7 whenever you need it.
Yeah, I do think it's important to reflect back. I think self-service is extraordinarily hard. Just the example that you're giving us, Jay, there's a legendary story about like a help desk chatbot. And the first thing the chatbot says to do is, have you tried rebooting the computer? Which, of course, immediately shuts down the chat session. And so you never have a chance to say, what next? So, that's a very gratuitous example. But, I do think it is a challenge to get self-service right in a way that people still feel served.
Such a great point. And one of the things that we did with HR and the HR services team is we have very talented professionals that sit in our service centers, and they essentially answer the questions of the employees. And so instead of just deploying a bot on the front end and turning it loose, to your point, because you can have exactly the experience you just described more on the HR side, where maybe, that's not the front end you want your employees to experience. So what we did is we basically took the knowledge base from SharePoint, where we store all of our knowledge articles, and we interface that directly with the Dynamics 365 customer service module that we use in each of those 3 service centers to answer the questions. And so as tickets would come in, the customer service representative in HR could look and see, here's kind of the answer. They would tailor it a bit. So we kind of brought it both together. And then we felt, hey, once we got this to be, say, 95%, where it's always just hitting the mark in terms of the answer, maybe that's when we turn that on to be more on the front end of the bot instead of an answer to a question provided by a human being. And that's one way to kind of think through it, is basically build trust between IT and HR so that the standard FAQ type questions can be more automated. But even then, there's always a nuance to it. And so that's kind of the bridge that we built.
I like just thinking through even the flexibility of that technology with Dynamics. I often think of the customer as a real customer beyond your walls. But for you in HR at the time, the customer was the Microsoft employee. And to plug in what it is that you need to support them as the customer in quotes, and to refine that and have it be where you can set some automation and learn as you go to build up the database. One specific database, if it's a right way to frame this question, that I wanted to drill into, because I know from HR and probably still for the HR team, it's a really great source of what are people thinking. I wanted to ask you, Jay, about search queries. Not so much what is the Camel query or the SQL query. If you think about search queries via Microsoft Search, and I know here at Microsoft we've also implemented Bing at work, that you and your team take in a lot of that keyword data in a unique way. And I was hoping for the audience perspective, if you could share briefly, maybe starting with what is our main company portal, MSW, if that's one entry point for search for us, and how it's deployed for search, and just some of the important information on how that has become a really rich source of information and as a listening tool to HR.
I love this. And when it comes down to it, I've been at Microsoft now for about 14 years and spent 7 or 8 years in Bing, or what became Bing, and really just love that team. And bringing that and being able to leverage that talent over there to help us with human resources has been helpful. And so to your point, one of the best learnings for our audience, I think, that I could probably pass along, when I first landed in HR, I noticed that the experience we had, which I think at the time, the customer satisfaction rating of our HR website was maybe bottom 10 or 9 of it was in the top 10 list in terms of sites of the company, and number 2 in terms of visits, and it's kind of gone from that to being it's the most visited and second highest NSAT in the entire company. And so that's the customer satisfaction ranking. So that's super. But what we did is the search query button, or search, was kind of a little button on the upper right side of the page. And what we did, just like with Bing, is we brought it right to the center, because you are getting free data. Like, you might as well find out. This is like the bingo box, the free spot on the bingo box. Like, let your customers tell you what's important to them, and then use that data to optimize if you build a Power App to solve for it, or if you just one click to the question they have. But take advantage of the fact that they're going to tell you what's important by the queries they type in. And so we really optimized HR Web, our SharePoint Online site, around that, putting search in the middle, using that as the entry point, really, so that we could quickly get to solving the problem, getting them into the right HR team to have a conversation that they want to have, versus trying to navigate a bunch of complex screens.
Yeah, it's funny. Just hearing you tell that story reminds me 10, 15 years ago out in the field, SharePoint 2007 and 2010 had the search center like on a different page, and customers would be so delighted when we would show, you can actually add search right to the center of the experience. They'd be like, well, because that is frequently what people come to any portal for, including HR Web.
That's right. Yep.
Hey, can you describe HR Web? I think the name makes it obvious, but our audience...
Yeah, I should have. And the Microsoft Web is the default landing page at Microsoft. And so that's MSW, and it's really the home, right? Just like your kind of classic intranet homepage, that is the home for Microsoft. So I have a brand new device, a PC, a phone, and I go to the browser and I'm logged in with my Azure Active Directory credentials. And the first thing it fires up is going to be MSW. The actual most visited site is the HR Web, which does, it hangs off of that like anywhere else. But also with Bing at Work, you can hard code in the path by being a Bing at Work customer and being able to include, your URLs. You can use Bing as an intranet too, and I love to show that. But back to your question, so what's super powerful about HR Web is more just about, it has the same look and feel. We were purposeful and not to make it be different, and jarring. So if somebody starts an MSW, the ribbon looks the same. In fact, one of the drivers for us to move from moved on to SharePoint Online was the fact that the search engines were different between SharePoint Online and others. And we were still, when I first got here, we're still on the prior version of SharePoint. And so when a customer would type an HR query into MSW, which again is our default landing page, our intranet home, they would get a different answer if they typed the same query in HR Web. And that was a problem for us. That was one of the key drivers for us to go to SharePoint Online, minus all the other amazing capabilities.
I know it's actually an article from maybe a couple of years ago now, when we were reviewing and providing information out about Microsoft's own move of a variety of portals, There's MSW, there's IT Web, HR Web, a lot of subportals for a lot of groups across the company. And it was really interesting. They noted, the kind of the pain points of moving too early, not yet being able to move because of X or Y feature not being there, to the point of, I think, your role now from an employee experience perspective. There was also that, what do we need as internal customers of our own technologies to be able to accomplish X in the cloud? And I think HR Web, if I really stare at it, knowing what's behind the scenes in terms of making it a real performant tool and accessible to a lot of different resources that then plumb through HR Web, that there were a lot of, blocks that got unblocked based on that conversation between our HR IT team, you and your team, and the SharePoint, what now we refer to as the modern intranet or the intelligent intranet, so that you can now have something like HR Web running in the cloud with a lot of great experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's foundational, especially now as we move to hybrid work, being able to work from anywhere. We've COVID has tested that. We've all been working, many of us, at least from our homes on a full-time basis, and being able to access those critical resources has never been more important. SharePoint Online enables that. And I'm not sure where we would be with HR if we hadn't made that move. It's absolutely, it is our foundation. It's the foundation. HR teams manage a lot of content. There's policies, there's career pathing and learning, and all kinds of amazing, it's the most visited site inside of Microsoft, and that's not uncommon with other customers. So leveraging all of its capabilities is important, but you can't be bound to just working from, inside on either on VPN or on connected hard to the network. So I couldn't agree more.
I'm wondering if we can kind of expand and chat a bit about some of the other HR tech that we use at Microsoft. So there's things like MyHub and Connect and LinkedIn Talent Insights. How do we use these to really support that HR goal of better employee engagement and improving our culture?
Yeah, super good question. And so in most companies, you will find there'll be some core HR system. Like at Microsoft, we use SuccessFactors, there's Oracle HCM, there's Workday, there's Dynamics for certain customers too. And so, the HR team will go off and purchase to operate the company that SaaS package. And hopefully it's sitting inside of Azure and so forth, just to enable some of the things that we like to do. So there's that. And I think customers will find, or, some people's philosophy is that's the HR system. And what I love to talk about is how SharePoint can surround that. So for example, if you're just changing your home address, which may not happen that often, but it's important to you at the time you need to do it, do you really want to send, as Mark pointed out, I view the employees of Microsoft as my customer. At least I did when I was focusing Firewall in. Now I'm spending time with external customers. But the point there is, I don't want them to have to go navigate a 300-screen SaaS application to do a 10-second transaction, which is change my home address. And so we've built that into SharePoint. So I go to my data, change my address, and then we call the APIs of SuccessFactors and write it off to that system. And so surrounding that HCM system with the lightweight experience is super powerful. We also looked at the data and said, hey, look, people are coming here for, this is pre-COVID, but travel letter verification, employment verification, entering in their time. And so we built Power Apps to go off and do that and just embedded them inside of HR Web. And so by using the data you get from the search queries, you'll go find out the top 25 most requested transactions your employees are trying to find out. And then you can start to figure out, how do I solve for that, be it Power Apps or whatever you're going to do. But that's kind of how we think through that.
It's funny. I spend an increasing amount of my time on a daily basis talking to our customers for Viva and related systems about that. And one of the things that I find myself saying often is, you may have a disconnected system and applications beyond Microsoft to drive employee experience. And it's funny just hearing you talk about our own systems. I am not going to suggest to customers ever again, you may have a series of other systems, but you absolutely have, that team of heroes that you need to bring together.
Right. And that's super important, right? I mean, because ultimately when you come down to it, finance has their system and the legal team has, maybe a contract management system they prefer to use. And so having the employee navigate all those big complex systems to do very basic things, because that's the home system for that corporate function, is the pivot I think Viva has been able to kind of move away from, which I love. It's putting the employee at the center, thinking about their knowledge, their company news, their well-being, and all the things that are going to matter to an employee, which, yes, I do care about changing my home address every once in a while, but I'm really interested about my career and the opportunities that I have, or surfacing up, in-time learning, or figuring out that it's the end of my day. And maybe I need to, Viva was able to use intelligence and tell me there's 3 things you mentioned. Should I follow up on these things? Like, that is helping me as an employee, not as an employee trying to complete a transaction. And that's what I love about the nuance of Viva.
And I think that's where the importance of being able to put it in front of the employee, maybe right when they need it, or, I know we've been terming and using the phrase in the flow of work, so that they don't have to train and learn these kind of obscure tools they're going to use maybe once a quarter or maybe even once a couple of years. But it might just be a very task-oriented thing. And I know for me, you mentioned MyHub, or Chris prompted you about MyHub, which is a really nice Power App that is actually deployed like a real app. I get it pretty easily on my Android phone and gives me a lot of great access. I can tell it's dynamic with it being up to date with news and actions that are being required of me. But the thing, we're kind of revolving around Viva as maybe something that I'd love to hear a little bit more about. There's now kind of this opportunity to be a little bit closer to where people are working. For a lot of people, and what we're promoting of having Microsoft Teams be this hub for teamwork and plus these days. And with Viva in the mix, if I think through something like MyHub, but coming a little bit closer to the end user, where we now have Viva Connections Mobile, you might have something coming from the HR team in that feed of information. And that's where I wanted to get your take, Jay, on the role of Viva. You talk a lot to our customers outbound, but just to share a little bit here at Microsoft, if you think in terms of the insights of what does the HR team need to do to make it so that customers are engaged, informed, and all the retention and whatnot across the whole company, that relationship back to the Viva product engineering team. I'd love to hear your take on how you've provided them with details and how you've seen that evolve with maybe being that customer zero.
It's been a great partnership, Mark, with our Viva engineering team. And, back to your other point too, just about teams. Like, I love to talk about teams as a single pane of glass. And it's really, to me, one of its many benefits is as a platform. It's a nice, easy, convenient way to deploy, solutions. And one of those, think about Viva and those left rail applications that are native to Teams, they're fantastic. And specifically, the HR team, the partnership we had with the engineering group was helping them triage the millions of possibilities on what Viva could be, really centered on putting the employee in the middle and their well-being. And so the partnership that the HR business fostered with engineering, and I was there as well, has been phenomenal, because that's a very big part of our culture, right? Is being, we think about hiring, tremendous talent and really inspiring them to do their best work, and you have to take care of them. And I think the insights into well-being have been super, super useful. And I'm really excited about when Viva Learning launches too. I spent more of my time with the Viva Learning offering, and that's on the horizon here soon. And that's going to be a way to really help create career pathing for the organization, and then send that to them in a native way that's just in the flow of work. Because it works the same way, the Teams app on the phone is amazing. Having that as part of that, I can consume content right before I on a plane, or maybe that's going to be someday if I fly again, right? But when it comes down to it, it's just going to be in the flow of work, and it's going to help me in my career. And so I love that Viva is not HCM, that Viva is not a human capital management system. Viva is about the person and their well-being and their growth and getting the right, even the company news. Something as simple as company news sent to me at the end of the day when it knows maybe I have a window of time to consume it, is putting me and it's thinking about me. And I just love that. And that's the conversations that happen between our HR team and the Viva engineering team. And that's where it shaped the product. And I think it's an awesome story.
But you mentioned Viva Learning, what you're working on. Tactically, a point in time, not a couple weeks ago, the Standards of Business Conduct Season 5, for me, was prompted through Viva Learning as a required training. And it was just so nice to have it there versus going over to a separate site that I've known for years, but it just was really nice.
Just to reflect back, I think there's an opportunity to kind of rethink the fabric of how you transform the personal experience, right? Because, back in the olden times when you'd get onto an airplane and fly somewhere to go learn something at a conference or some 5-day training program, well, if I'm going to put 5 days in, I better get a solid volume of content out there. And if you kind of remove all of that from the equation, and then you bring technology to the forefront, like maybe I don't need a course. Maybe I need a series of 5-minute coachings to help me get through something over the course of 3 weeks.
And maybe I need to know what, Mark and Chris think super important to them, because I'm kind of following them. And from a social learning standpoint, boy, I'm really loving podcasting. And here's some things that are top of mind for them. And they have their learner board and things that of interest to them. And I'm going to follow and subscribe to them. And that'll show up in my Viva feed. And then someone will see that. And then that they will take advantage. So that's the beautiful thing. It's the kind of the traditional learning, the standards of business conduct, that maybe there's some technical training I can pull from whatever content. Maybe it's MS Learn, maybe it's Pluralsight. That'll be now available to me in a seamless experience inside of Viva Learning. But it's also going to be my peers at Microsoft. What's important to them and what are they consuming? That's awesome stuff.
Folks who aren't familiar with standards of business conduct, that is a training program at Microsoft. It is presented as an annual, almost mini series, done sort of in the style of network television, procedural. It's mysterious. It's got great production values. And the funny thing is, it's sort of acquired a life of its own, that people actually actively look forward to the release of the annual Standards of Business Conduct training.
Yes. What is going to happen to Nelson next?
Right. And there's a whole Yammer following about this. People are guessing and forecasting, almost like the Game of Thrones episode. We kind of have that internally with Yammer. Just like, let's try and figure out where Nelson's going to go. Amazing, right? It's just an amazing transformation. I think it's a good story to tell. It's true.
I should check Twitter. Close students of Microsoft demo environments know that the most frequently seen employee at Contoso is Megan Bowen, and someone has a Twitter account basically devoted to being Megan Bowen. Like, you all wish you were me, and my ID gets hacked thousands of times a day by demo people, but there's only one me.
I love it.
She is known as the hardest working person at Contoso Incorporated.
Contoso has a long, beautiful history. Yeah, that's funny.
Jay, to bring it back to Microsoft, I think both Chris and I, on behalf of employees, certainly everything that you've shared today, and we know it's times 10 what you've really accomplished over the last 4 or 5 years. So thank you for being a great lead in our HR department to make our lives easier. But also thank you for being on the IntraZone. We hope that your conversations with customers continue to be great, and that everything that Chris and the Viva team and the product team work on, you can continue to add a lot of feedback internally and then evangelize externally. But thank you for your time today.
Well, my pleasure, and thank you very much. It's a great team here at Microsoft. Couldn't do it without all the team members. I'm just part of the team, but thank you so much.
We want to thank our guests, Kerry Olin and Jay Clem, and of course to David Green and the Digital HR Leaders podcast team for letting us repurpose great audio clips from their discussion with Kathleen Hogan.
And Mark, guess what I didn't do on today's podcast?
You didn't reference a sport in any way.
Made you do it.
Dang it. I knew there was a loop there. We talked about loops earlier, and it's that sports loop. It always gets me.
Mark, I also wanted to thank you. This has really been quite an experience. Thank you for making this such an enjoyable journey for me as well as our audience.
Yeah, as employees and hearing more from our own HR, we hope that's of value beyond us and, of course, throughout the IntraZone. I love getting fluent and up to date on what they do to make our lives better.
We encourage you to check out our show page for links to all of what we discussed today and more. Visit us at aka.ms/theintrazone.
You can reach us via email at theintrazone@microsoft.com or find us on Twitter at SharePoint, at mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
Remember to rate, review, and tell all your friends about the show. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. We're your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. This has been The IntraZone, a show about the Microsoft 365 well-to-do about all things HR, intelligent intranet.